Clearly someone printed enough pamphlets because Twitter has been going absolutely crazy today with the news that Taika Waititi has officially signed on to direct Thor 4. I imagine that Marvel will be sharing some sort of roadmap for Phase 4 at Comic-Con this weekend, but I wanted to share my thoughts on what some potential storylines might be for the new Thor movie, which is Thor 4. However, in my eyes, it's more like Thor 2. The first one is the Eternals saga. Now, we already know that Marvel has been working on an Eternals movie, so it makes a lot of sense that they would try and set that up in an earlier film, such as Thor. However, I think that saga is actually going to go with the Guardians 3, or as Guardians of the Galaxy, whatever they end up calling the next Guardians film. Since the Eternal Saga ties in with the Celestials, it makes a lot of sense for it to be a continuation of Guardians, who first introduced us to the Celestials, first with Nowhere, and then obviously with Ego the Living Planet, who turned out to be Quill's dad. Now, of course, we saw Thor leave with them at the end of Endgame, so it makes sense that he'd be along for the ride. What I think makes the most sense for a standalone Thor film would be the Seed storyline. In that series, Norman Osborn is appointed the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., which he quickly dismembers and then rebrands as Hammer. And under the advisement of Loki, decides to invade the Asgardian settlement on Earth. Osborn has an Iron Man suit of his own, which he calls the Iron Patriot, which is actually different than the version we got in Iron Man 3, but he leads a group called the Dark Avengers, and they are actually a group of villains who are posing as heroes, but one of them includes Ragnarok, a clone of Thor. So this storyline actually fits in really well with the MCU right now. In Far From Home, we saw that people definitely have a bias against aliens after Thanos' attack, which makes a lot of sense. But that also means now we have roots for the World Security Council to bring in someone like Hammer to try and evict the Asgardians from Earth. I'm not really sure if the Dark Avengers would actually have a clone of Thor, but it makes a lot of sense if Loki was impersonating Thor, trying to use his likeness to drum up credibility for the team. Endgame gave us a lot of soft reboots for some characters, and one of them is Loki. So with all the time travel, the last time we actually see Loki is not the developed and redeemed character from the end of Ragnarok going into Infinity War, but instead he's the angry, power-hungry Loki from the original Avengers who is bent on world domination. Not only did that Loki want to rule Earth, but he also wanted to rule Asgard, and now considering Asgard is on Earth, he can do both in one fell swoop. If it is Loki impersonating Thor, because of all the time travel, he'd most likely have the personality of Thor in either 1 or 2, a much more arrogant, much more warrior-focused Thor. I do think it would be really cool to get a Thor versus Thor battle, kind of like an old Thor versus new Thor, similar to what we had in Endgame with Captain America. And let's face it, Marvel loves to have their heroes fight someone with the same powers, so I think that's a win-win for everyone. If the MCU uses Thor 4 to introduce Hammer, they actually already have then a really good way to introduce all of the Fox properties, which I imagine they do through like an end credit scene at the end of it. Not only does Hammer have strong ties with Doctor Doom, but one of Osborn's main orders of business as head of S.H.I.E.L.D. was to take control of the mutant registry, or in this case, the Sokovia Accords, when he was building the Dark Avengers. I'm curious to see how Marvel actually handles introduction of the X-Men. So they killed off all the mutants in the comics in favor of Inhumans, but then MCU killed off the Inhumans because that was just a massive flop. And then in like Age of Ultron, they were calling Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver enhanced. So I'm curious to see if they're actually going to go back to calling them mutants. But I do have a couple theories on how they could easily introduce them into the universe. But that's another video. So even if the MCU doesn't want to introduce Norman Osborn because he's a Sony character, they could very easily bring back Justin Hammer to be, the head of Hammer. Sam Rockwell has gone on record saying he wants to come back, and I think we didn't get enough of him in Iron Man 2. I really liked him as a villain. So those are my thoughts on Thor 4. I'm really excited to see what's in store at the Marvel panel for Comic-Con this weekend, but I'm curious, what do you think the movie's going to be about?